Today, we're going to dive into the depths of terror with 7 scary stories involving evil demons. Get ready to hear chilling tales of dark entities, terrifying possessions, and supernatural encounters that will make you sleep with the light on. So settle in, make the sign of the cross if you like, and let's begin this chilling journey. Oh, and before some evil force interferes, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the little bell, and leave your like. This helps the channel a lot and ensures that you don't miss out on any terrifying content like this. Let's go. The Pact with Hell. On a cold fall night in Los Angeles, Ethan Wright, a young 24-year-old musician, was on the verge of despair. His dream of becoming a rock legend seemed more and more distant. His band, Midnight Eclipse, played in empty bars and decaying clubs, while bills piled up and opportunities disappeared. Ethan felt that time was running out. That night, after yet another failed gig, Ethan found himself alone in a dark bar on Sunset Boulevard. He was about to give up when a mysterious man approached him. The man, dressed in an impeccable black suit and with intense eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light, sat down next to Ethan. "You're talented," said the man with an enigmatic smile. "But talent isn't enough in this world." Ethan looked at him skeptically. "And what do you know about that?" "I know a lot more than you think," the man replied, leaning forward. "My name is Lucas, and I'm here to offer you exactly what you want: eternal fame." Ethan laughed nervously. "And what's the price? My soul?" Lucas smiled even wider. "Something like that." Desperate and with nothing to lose, Ethan accepted the offer. Lucas handed him a contract written on a black sheet of paper with bright red letters. The words seemed to dance on the paper as Ethan read, but he signed without hesitation. The next morning, everything changed. The band received an unexpected invitation to open the concert of one of the biggest rock bands of our time. The gig was a smashing success, and Ethan became an overnight sensation. Record deals quickly followed, and his music dominated the radio. Midnight Eclipse became one of the most popular bands in the world in a matter of months. But as their fame grew, strange things began to happen. Ethan noticed disturbing changes in the people around him. Rachel, his faithful girlfriend since the hard times, began to act distant and cold. His parents avoided his calls and seemed confused when he visited. Even his bandmates began to seem strange, as if something had erased their original personalities. Soon, Ethan began to have terrible nightmares every night. He dreamt of skeletal hands pulling him into the depths of an abyss, while Lucas watched with a cruel smile. It was then that he realized the truth. The contract he had signed not only compromised his soul, but also the souls of those he loved. Desperate to save Rachel and his family, Ethan sought help from an occultist named Dr. Malcolm Lee, known for dealing with supernatural cases. "The pact you made is ancient and powerful," explained Dr. Lee as he analyzed the infernal contract. "But there is one way to break it. You need to face the demon directly and renounce what it has given you." Ethan knew it would be dangerous, but he had no choice. The following night, during a sold-out concert at the Staples Center, Ethan decided to act. In the middle of the performance, he abruptly stopped playing and began reciting the words, "Doctor." Lee had taught him, an ancient invocation to confront Lucas. The stage lights began to flicker violently as a shadowy figure emerged from the shadows behind him. "Lucas, do you really think you can escape the pact?" sneered Lucas as the audience froze in absolute silence. Ethan took a firm hold of his guitar and began to play a dark melody that seemed to resonate deep within the earth. The song was full of pain and regret, a desperate attempt to reverse the pact. As he played, Lucas moved slowly towards him, but something unexpected happened. The audience began to sing along with Ethan, as if they were being freed from an invisible prison. The collective force of the music began to weaken Lucas. He screamed in rage as his form began to dissipate into darkness. With a final crashing chord, Ethan fell to his knees on stage as Lucas disappeared completely in an explosion of black light. The audience erupted into deafening applause, believing it was all part of the show. But Ethan knew that something inside him had changed forever. Although he had broken the pact and freed those he loved, the price was high. Ethan lost his ability to play music completely. His hands shook uncontrollably whenever he tried to hold a guitar again. Today, years after that fateful night, Ethan lives anonymously in a small coastal town in Ireland. He hasn't played music since, but sometimes he hears distant echoes of that somber melody, a constant reminder of the terrible price of eternal fame. The abandoned church. When Nathan, Emily, Jake, and Sarah decided to explore the old church at the top of the hill, they had no idea what awaited them. The building, built centuries ago, was in ruins, its walls covered in moss, and the broken windows letting the wind howl inside. The villagers avoided the place, whispering stories about disappearances and unexplained events. The church was isolated, surrounded by twisted trees that seemed to lean over it, as if to hide it from the world. As they pushed open the heavy wooden doors, a smell of mold and old incense enveloped them. The interior was dark, with fallen pews and cobwebs covering the dirty, stained glass windows. On the altar, a huge symbol was carved into the floor, surrounded by unlit candles. Emily, fascinated by the occult, knelt down to analyze the drawings. "This isn't Christian," she muttered, feeling a shiver run down her spine as she ran her fingers over the worn marks. Jake laughed, kicking one of the dusty benches. "They're just superstitions." But in the next instant, a crash echoed through the hall. The floor beneath the altar cracked, and an icy wind blew, bringing with it whispers in an unknown language. The candles around the symbol suddenly lit up, casting a flickering light on the stained walls. Nathan tried to calm the group, but his eyes widened when he saw a shadow emerge from the cracks. A tall, distorted figure emerged, its red eyes glowing in the darkness. Its skin was twisted and black like burning coal, and its hands ended in sharp claws. "You freed me." The voice was deep, reverberating throughout the church like distant thunder. Sarah screamed and ran for the exit, but the door, which had previously been unlocked, now wouldn't budge. The demon raised a skeletal hand, and the surrounding candles flickered violently before bursting into black flames. The heat was suffocating, and the smell of sulfur took over the room. The walls began to vibrate, as if something was moving inside them. Emily remembered the legends she had heard about the church. They said that the place had been sealed to imprison something terrible. She pulled a book out of her backpack, an ancient grimoire that she carried out of curiosity. "There is a sealing ritual, but it has to be done at the altar," she said, her voice shaky as she tried to flip through the pages with trembling hands. Nathan and Jake tried to distract the creature while Emily deciphered the words in the book. Sarah, in a panic, held up a rusty crucifix found on the floor. "Does this still have power?" she asked, clutching it to her chest as tears streamed down her face. The demon laughed, his voice echoing like 1,000 overlapping screams. "Your faith is weak, but fear, that is strong. He advanced on Jake, who was thrown against a wall with an invisible force. His body fell to the ground with a dry thud, leaving a trail of blood on the cold stone. Emily shouted the first verse of the spell. The air became dense, charged with electricity, and the creature hesitated. "Keep going," shouted Nathan, helping Jake to his feet, despite the blood dripping from his forehead. Sarah joined Emily, repeating the words, her voice becoming stronger with each syllable. The church began to shake. The walls cracked even more, and a violent wind circulated through the hall. The demon roared in pain as a glowing circle formed around him. He tried to escape, but the ritual was working. "You can't trap me again," it roared, its voice now filled with despair. With one last scream, the creature was sucked back into the ground, while the cracks closed quickly as if they had never existed. Silence overtook the church, interrupted only by the panting of the friends. The four of them looked at each other, their eyes wide with shock. Jake was shaking, trying to contain the bleeding on his forehead. The air still smelled of sulfur, but the evil presence had disappeared. The door, once locked, was now open. Without hesitation, they ran out of there, without looking back. When they reached the village, the church bell, which hadn't been rung for over 100 years, resounded one last time. The frightened villagers looked up at the hill, feeling an inexplicable chill. They knew that something terrible had happened that night, but their friends never talked about what they really saw inside. Time passed, and the church was forgotten again. But anyone who ventured near it swore they heard whispers at nightfall, as if something was still there, waiting to be released again. Days later, Emily couldn't sleep. Nightmares haunted her nights, and in all of them, she saw the demon's red eyes staring at her in the darkness. The whispers, which once seemed distant, now echoed inside her own home. When she finally mustered the courage to look in the mirror for a moment, she saw another figure reflected behind her, a black figure, smiling. Nathan began to notice shadows moving around his room, even when the lights were off. Picture frames fell off the walls, objects moved around without explanation. The smell of sulfur hung in the air every morning. Something had escaped with them, something that shouldn't have been awakened. In the village, strange disappearances began to occur. Residents swore they saw shadowy figures wandering the streets at night, and the church bell, long silenced, rang alone at random times. The group realized that perhaps they hadn't sealed the creature off completely. Evil was still around, and this time, they didn't know if they would be able to stop it again. The Forbidden Book. In the university city of Oxford, England, ancient literature student Alex Taylor was known for his insatiable curiosity. He would spend hours exploring the dusty shelves of the university library, looking for rare and forgotten texts. It was on one of these expeditions that he came across an ancient and mysterious book, bound in black leather and adorned with strange symbols that seemed to dance on the cover. The title, De Mysteries Tenebris, was engraved in golden letters that glowed faintly in the candlelight of the library. Alex felt a shiver run down his spine as he opened the book, revealing yellowed pages full of rituals and invocations to supernatural entities. Intrigued, Alex decided to take the book home, determined to study it further. His room in the university accommodation became a research sanctuary, with candles lit and incense burning as he immersed himself in the pages of the book. As he read about the rituals, Alex began to feel more and more attracted to the idea of summoning a demon. He had always been skeptical of the supernatural, but there was something about the book that seemed to call to him. One day, convinced that he was ready, Alex decided to perform one of the rituals described in the book. He gathered his closest friends, Emily, Jack, and Sarah, and convinced them to take part in the experiment. "Let's just play," he said, trying to reassure them. "It won't come to anything." The night they chose was cold and dark, with a full moon shining in the sky. In the basement of the lodge, Alex drew a ritualistic circle on the floor with white chalk and began to recite the ancient words from the book. The air seemed to become heavier as he spoke, and the candles began to flicker as if they were being blown by an invisible wind. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed through the basement, followed by an oppressive silence. Alex felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked at his friends. They looked different. Their eyes were darker, and their smiles seemed to contain something sinister. Over the next few days, Alex realized that something was terribly wrong. Emily started acting strangely, talking to herself and laughing for no reason. Jack became aggressive and violent, while Sarah seemed to be in a constant trance. Alex soon discovered that he had released an evil entity that was possessing his friends. The book, it seemed, wasn't just an ancient text. It was a key to open portals to hell. Desperate to save his friends, Alex sought help from a local occult expert. The man, a wise old man called Professor Wells, explained that the only way to exorcise the entity was to perform a purification ritual. But this would require Alex to confront the demon directly. The following night, Alex gathered his courage and returned to the basement with Professor Wells. There, they found Emily, Jack, and Sarah in a catatonic state, their bodies possessed by the evil entity. With Professor Wells guiding him, Alex began the purification ritual. He recited ancient words, while Professor Wells used a crucifix to repel the entity. The air was charged with tension as the spiritual battle raged. In the end, the entity was forced to retreat, freeing Alex's friends. But the cost was high. Alex felt that part of his soul had been consumed by the ritual, and he was never the same again. In the days that followed, Alex began to notice changes in himself. He felt darker and more isolated, as if a shadow was always by his side. The forbidden book, now hidden in a safe at the bank, seemed to call out to him again. Alex knew he needed to get away from Oxford and everything that had happened there. He moved to a small town in the English countryside, where he tried to rebuild his life. But the memories of that night in the cellar continued to haunt him. Today, Alex lives a simple life, far from the dark memories of Oxford. He has never touched the forbidden book again, but sometimes he hears distant whispers in his mind, a constant reminder of the danger of playing with forces beyond human comprehension. And in the basement of the university accommodation, where it all began, it is said that muffled laughter and whispers can still be heard coming from the shadows, an eternal echo of the night Alex Taylor unleashed the evil that should never have been awakened. Alex's story became a legend among Oxford students, a warning about the dangers of messing with supernatural forces. And although he managed to save his friends, Alex was never able to completely rid himself of the shadow he had brought into his life. Years later, Alex still felt the weight of that night. He knew he could never return to Oxford, because the past was always there, waiting to be relived. The university town, once a place of dreams and discovery, was now a grim reminder of what had happened. And so, Alex continued his life in silence, always aware that the evil he had unleashed was still there, waiting for its next victim. And on full moon nights, When the wind blew gently through the deserted streets of the small town, he swore he heard distant whispers, a constant reminder that some things are best left alone. What's up, guys? The stories are chilling so far, aren't they? If you're enjoying these tales of evil demons, how about taking a quick break and subscribing to the channel? Just click on the subscribe button below and leave a like too. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing you more scary content like this. It's quick and makes all the difference. Now, let's get back to our demonic stories, shall we? There's still a lot of horror ahead. The House of Horrors. In the town of Salem, Massachusetts, the Mitchell family found what seemed to be the house of their dreams for an unbelievably low price. David, a writer in search of inspiration, his wife Karen, an artist, and their two children, 14-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Michael, were eager to start a new life, away from the hustle and bustle of Boston. The Victorian house, with its Gothic turrets and arched windows, was impressive, although in need of renovation. Built at the end of the 19th century, the property had a rich history that the real estate agent mentioned only superficially. "There have been some incidents in the past," he said nervously, "but that was a long time ago." What the agent didn't reveal was that the house had been the scene of satanic rituals in the 1970s, when a cult led by a man called Elias Blackwood held ceremonies to invoke demonic entities. The final ritual ended in tragedy, with all the cult members dying in mysterious circumstances. Since then, the house has remained empty for long periods, with owners never staying for more than a few months. The Mitchell family's first days in the house were marked by strange little incidents, objects disappearing and reappearing in different places, lights flashing without explanation, and a persistent chill in certain rooms, especially the basement. David attributed everything to electrical problems and old plumbing, while Karen tried to ignore the constant feeling of being watched. Emma was the first to realize that something was deeply wrong. She started having vivid nightmares about hooded people performing rituals in the basement. In her dreams, she saw a black-eyed man leading the ceremonies, calling out to something from the depths. She would wake up screaming, but her parents believed it was just the stress of moving. Things got worse when Michael started talking to an imaginary friend called Mr. Blackwood. He described the friend as a man in a black suit with completely black eyes who told him stories about the house. Mr. Blackwood says that this is his house and that we are guests, Michael explained with childlike innocence. But he says it will soon be time for us to leave, for good. Karen found strange symbols carved into the walls behind the wallpaper she was removing during the renovation. The symbols looked ancient and unsettling, drawn with something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. When he showed it to David, he was intrigued and started researching the history of the house. In the local library, David discovered newspaper articles about the cult of Elias Blackwood and the rituals performed in the house. According to the accounts, Blackwood believed that he could open a portal to another dimension and summon powerful entities to grant him unlimited power. The final ritual, carried out during a lunar eclipse, ended with the death of all the participants, their bodies found in grotesque positions with expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces. Meanwhile, in the house, the demonstrations became more aggressive. Karen was pushed down the stairs by invisible hands, escaping with only a few bruises. Emma woke up one night with deep scratch marks on her back, forming symbols similar to those found on the walls. And Michael spent hours staring into the basement, muttering conversations with his invisible friend. David returned from the library determined to protect his family. He consulted an occult expert who explained that the house had become an anchor point for demonic entities summoned during rituals. The demons were attached to the property but fed off the vital energy of the occupants, eventually driving them to madness or death. Armed with knowledge and symbols of protection, David tried to perform a purification ritual, but the entities were too powerful. During the ceremony, lights exploded, furniture was thrown across the room, and a guttural voice echoed off the walls. "This house is ours. You belong to us now." Desperate, the Mitchells tried to flee, only to find that they couldn't get out. Doors slammed shut violently, windows refused to break, and a dark fog surrounded the property, preventing any escape. They were trapped with the entities that were now openly manifesting themselves, shadows moving across the walls, voices whispering promises of eternal torture, and grotesque apparitions of deformed figures watching them from dark corners. In a final act of desperation, Karen remembered something she had read about demonic rituals. They often involved an anchoring object. If they could find and destroy this object, perhaps they could break the entity's link with the house. The family split up to search, each facing personalized horrors as the entities tried to stop them. It was Michael who found the object, an old box buried under the basement floor, containing a book bound in human leather and a skull engraved with symbols identical to those on the walls. When the family gathered around the object, the demonstrations reached their peak. The whole house shook, and demonic voices screamed in rage. With his last strength, David managed to destroy the book and the skull, causing an explosion of energy that shook the house to its foundations. For a moment, everything was silent, and the family believed it was over. But when they tried to leave, they discovered the terrible truth. It wasn't the demons who were trapped in the house. It was them. The House of Horrors had claimed 4 more souls for its collection, and the Mitchells were now part of its dark history, condemned to wander its corridors forever. The Flawed Exorcism. In a small town in Italy called Montesilvano, the young priest, Alessandro Bianchi, was called in to perform an exorcism on a 12-year-old girl called Sofia Ricci. Sofia's family believed she was possessed by a demon, and after failed attempts at medical treatment, they turned to the church for help. Alessandro, newly ordained and full of idealism, took up the challenge. He studied the rituals of exorcism and prepared himself to confront the evil entity. However, despite his dedication, the priest was inexperienced in exorcisms. His faith was strong, but he knew that experience was crucial in cases like this. The night of the ritual arrived, and Alessandro, accompanied by 2 other older priests, Father Marco and Father Giuseppe, entered Sofia's family home. The atmosphere was full of tension, and the air seemed heavy. Sofia, tied to the bed, was screaming and struggling violently. Her eyes seemed to be burning with an internal flame, and her voice was a mixture of whispers and screams that made the priests tremble. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," began Alessandro, his voice trembling slightly as he held the crucifix in front of Sofia's contorted face. The girl reacted violently, spitting and screaming in a language Alessandro didn't recognize. Father Marco, a gray-haired man with experience in exorcisms, put his hand on Alessandro's shoulder. "Be strong, my son. The devil will try to intimidate you." Alessandro continued the ritual, reciting the ancient words and using the crucifix to try to repel the entity. However, as the exorcism progressed, Sofia began to become even more violent. She spoke in different voices, some in Latin, and her eyes seemed to glow with a supernatural intensity. "You have no power over me, priest," growled the voice that came out of Sophia's mouth, but which clearly didn't belong to the girl. "I know your sins, Alessandro Bianchi. I know the doubts in your heart." The priest tried to hold her down, but she broke free with superhuman strength. In a moment of desperation, Alessandro decided to use a reliquary containing a relic of Saint Michael the Archangel, hoping that this would strengthen the ritual. But instead of weakening the demon, the relic seemed to have the opposite effect. The entity began to laugh, and its voice echoed through the house like thunder. "You've brought what I wanted," said the demon through Sophia. "Now I'm stronger." The ritual failed catastrophically. Sophia was freed from her bonds and ran out of the house, disappearing into the night. The priests, terrified, didn't know what to do. Father Giuseppe was found dead the next morning, his body contorted into an impossible position, and Father Marco went mad, repeating incessantly, "He has become stronger. He's become stronger." In the days that followed, Montesilvano was plagued by supernatural events. Windows broke on their own, and voices were heard in deserted streets. Sophia's family disappeared, and no one saw the girl again. The town panicked, and many began to suspect that the demon had spread, possessing other people. Children began to show strange behavior, speaking in ancient languages and drawing disturbing symbols on the walls of their homes. Animals were found dead in macabre rituals, and a shadow seemed to hang over the town. Alessandro, consumed by guilt and fear, decided to isolate himself in a remote monastery in the mountains to reflect on his failure. He spent years studying and preparing to face the devil again, determined not to fail a second time. He read all the ancient texts he could find, searching for a way to defeat the entity. "What have I done?" asked Alessandro every night as he flagellated himself in penance. "Not only did I fail to save Sophia, but I strengthened the evil that possessed her." But the demon didn't forget. 5 years after the failed exorcism, Alessandro received an anonymous letter with just 2 words: "I'm waiting for you." He knew that the final confrontation was near. That same night, Alessandro had a disturbing dream. In it, Sophia appeared, but not as the frightened girl he had tried to save. She was transformed, her eyes completely black and her skin marked with demonic symbols. "You set me free, Father," she said in the dream. "Now I am in many, and soon I will be in all." Alessandro woke up in a cold sweat, knowing what he had to do. He returned to Montesilvano, only to find the city transformed. The streets were deserted, and the few people who still lived there looked like shadows of themselves, moving around like lifeless puppets. The local church, where Alessandro had been ordained, was desecrated. Inverted crucifixes decorated the walls, and the altar had been replaced by a grotesque structure made of bones and putrefying flesh. It was there that Alessandro found Sophia, or what was left of her. The girl, now a teenager, was sitting on the desecrated altar, surrounded by Montesilvano citizens in a trance. "Welcome back, Father," she said, her voice a mixture of the girl she had been and the entity that now completely controlled her. "Are you ready to finish what you started?" Alessandro knew he wasn't ready, but he also knew he had no choice. He raised his crucifix and began to recite the exorcism ritual again, this time with the wisdom and determination that only years of study and penance could provide. The battle that followed was epic and terrible. The demon, now much more powerful, fought back fiercely. But Alessandro had learned from his mistakes. He was no longer alone in his faith. He had found an inner strength that the demon could not break. In the end, Alessandro managed to drive the demon out of Sofia, but the cost was high. The girl didn't survive the exorcism, and Alessandro was scarred for life, both physically and spiritually. The city of evil. In the small town of Ravenwood, nestled between mountains in northern Washington state, something sinister was happening. Detective James Mercer had been sent from Seattle to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred over the last 6 months. 17 people had disappeared without a trace, and the local authorities seemed unable, or perhaps unwilling, to solve the case. Upon arriving in town, Mercer immediately sensed that something was wrong. The sky over Ravenwood seemed perpetually overcast, and a strange smell, like sulfur, hung in the air. The locals watched him with blank stares as he drove his car down the main street, their expressions an unsettling mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Mercer stayed in the town's only hotel, an old building with creaky floorboards and an elderly receptionist whose eyes never seemed to blink. "We don't get many visitors in Ravenwood," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "especially policemen." The next morning, Mercer went to the local police station to meet Sheriff Dawson. The man was burly, with deep circles under his eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he leafed through the files of the missing. Most of them were out-of-towners, Dawson explained, avoiding eye contact. People passing through town. They probably went on their way without telling anyone. 17 people in 6 months? Asked Mercer. "Doesn't that seem strange to you?" The sheriff shrugged. Ravenwood has always been a peculiar place. Mercer began his investigation by interviewing the residents, but encountered resistance everywhere. People responded with short, evasive sentences, as if they were reciting a script. Everyone seemed to share the same opinion. The disappeared probably left on their own. It was on the 3rd day that Mercer noticed something even more disturbing. During a town hall meeting, he observed Mayor Hammond giving a speech about the importance of keeping Ravenwood pure. Under certain lights, Mercer swore he could see something moving under the mayor's skin, as if his human form was just an ill-fitting mask. That night, unable to sleep, Mercer went out for a walk. That's when he saw a group of locals heading silently towards the old church on the outskirts of town. Curious, he followed them, keeping his distance. The church, a stone Gothic structure, was lit by red candles. Hidden behind a column, Mercer watched in horror as the citizens of Ravenwood gathered in a circle. Mayor Hammond was in the center, but now his appearance had completely changed. His skin looked scaly, his eyes were completely black, and horns protruded from his forehead. "Our masters demand more sacrifices," Hammond announced in a voice that was no longer human. "The portal needs to be fed." Mercer tried to leave discreetly, but a board creaked under his feet. Dozens of faces turned in his direction, black eyes shining in the candlelight. He ran desperately through the night, pursued by creatures that were no longer entirely human. Back at the hotel, Mercer locked himself in his room and tried to call his superior in Seattle, but the phone only emitted a static buzz. His cell phone had no signal. He was completely isolated. Sifting through the files he had collected, Mercer discovered that the disappearances had started exactly after an archaeological dig in the caves near the city. A team of researchers had found ancient artifacts, including a stone altar with inscriptions in an unknown language. Determined to find answers, Mercer drove to the caves the next morning. The site was abandoned, with rusty digging equipment scattered around the entrance. Inside the main cave, he found the altar mentioned in the reports. The inscriptions seemed to pulsate with a light of their own, and in the center of the altar was a fissure that ran deep into the earth. The sound of footsteps made Mercer turn around. Sheriff Dawson was standing at the entrance to the cave, but his eyes were now completely black. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective," said Dawson, his voice distorted. "Now you'll have to join the others." "What others?" asked Mercer, backing away slowly. "The sacrifices. We need to feed the portal so that our masters can cross completely into this world." Dawson stepped forward, his human form beginning to distort. Mercer drew his gun and fired, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. In desperation, he grabbed an abandoned pickaxe and threw it against the cave ceiling. Rocks began to fall, and Mercer took advantage of the distraction to escape. Back in town, Mercer found his car with flat tires. The entire population of Ravenwood seemed to be on the streets now, slowly advancing towards him with black eyes and inhuman smiles. The Demon of Death. In the city of Berlin, Germany, Dr. Klaus Weber had been working at the prestigious Charité University Hospital for over 15 years. A specialist in terminal illnesses, Klaus had seen his share of deaths over the years, but had never gotten used to the feeling of loss when a patient passed away under his care. Everything changed when a strange patient was admitted to the terminal ward. The man, who introduced himself as Heinrich Müller, had a diagnosis of advanced cancer, but something about him disturbed Klaus deeply. Heinrich had piercing eyes that seemed to see through people, and his presence caused the medical team inexplicable discomfort. "There's something strange about him," commented head nurse Greta after checking Heinrich's vital signs. "The patients in the room next to him seem to be getting worse faster." Klaus initially dismissed the observation as coincidence, but began to notice a disturbing pattern. Patients who were stable suddenly got worse after Heinrich visited their rooms during the night. Deaths at the hospital had increased dramatically since the mysterious patient's arrival. What intrigued Klaus most was that despite his terminal diagnosis, Heinrich seemed not to be suffering from the debilitating effects of the disease. He remained alert, with an energy that contrasted with his supposedly critical state. Intrigued, Klaus began to monitor Heinrich secretly. One night, he witnessed something impossible. Heinrich rose from his bed, apparently cured, and entered the room of a terminally ill patient. Klaus watched in horror as Heinrich transformed into a shadowy figure that hovered over the patient, extracting a luminous essence from her body. The woman died instantly. With his heart racing and his hands trembling, Klaus confronted Heinrich the next morning in his private office. "I know what you are," said Klaus, trying to keep his voice steady. Heinrich smiled, revealing strangely sharp teeth. "It took longer than I expected, Doctor. Most doctors are too busy to notice." Heinrich revealed his true nature, a soul collector, an ancient demon who fed on the life energy of the dying. The hospital was his perfect hunting ground, a place where death was expected and rarely questioned. "I've been here for centuries, Dr. Weber. I just change forms and hospitals when necessary. You doctors make my job easier by gathering the dying in one place." Klaus tried to warn his colleagues, but no one believed his claims. The hospital director suggested he take medical leave, attributing his stories to stress. But Klaus knew the truth and was determined to stop the demon. Desperate for answers, he consulted his grandmother, a woman who had always spoken about the spirit world with unsettling certainty. She handed him an old book with yellowed pages written in archaic German. "Some demons feed on the transition between life and death," she explained. "They are gatherers, parasites of the last breath." Klaus researched ancient medical and religious texts, discovering a ritual for imprisoning evil entities. He would need a sacred object, symbols of protection, and, most importantly, the courage to face what was beyond human comprehension. On the decisive night, Klaus prepared a trap using protective symbols drawn in salt and an ancient reliquary that had belonged to his grandmother. When he confronted Heinrich in his hospital room, the demon revealed its true form, a skeletal creature with flaming eyes and translucent skin that revealed pulsating organs that weren't human. "You're not the first to try to stop me," hissed the creature. "The others have fed my hunger for centuries." A battle of wills ensued, with Klaus reciting the words of the ritual while the demon tried to reach him with sharp claws. The air in the room became freezing, and the lights flickered frantically. Klaus felt his own life force being drained, but he persisted, completing the ritual and trapping the demon in the reliquary. With a final scream that echoed through the hospital corridors, Heinrich was sucked into the small object, which now pulsed with an eerie red light. Although he managed to stop the demon, the confrontation left Klaus changed forever. He had aged 10 years that night, his hair now marked by white streaks. He now realized that the line between life and death was thinner than medicine could explain, and that some souls needed protection during their final passage. Today, Dr. Weber continues to work at the Charité, but with a new mission: to protect his patients not only from physical illnesses, but also from the dark entities that lurk in the corridors between life and death. The reliquary remains locked in a safe in his house, but sometimes, on the quietest nights, Klaus can hear whispers coming from it, promises of return and revenge. And in the hospital records, a curious pattern has emerged. Mortality rates have dropped significantly since the unexplained disappearance of patient Heinrich Müller. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving evil demons. So, what did you think? Which story gave you the most chills? Will any of them make you think twice before sleeping with the lights off tonight? Let me know in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the depths of demonic terror, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing you more terrifying content like this. And if you're not subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe now and activate the little bell.